A few videos ago, I reviewed the xTool F1 Ultra, and what makes this machine neat is that it has two lasers in it, one that can do metal and one that can do more natural materials like wood and leather. I demonstrated this dual functionality in my review, but in today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into a project with the F1 Ultra. This project will be making a leather sheath for my Viking Seax that I made months ago for a YouTube challenge. This poor knife has been just sitting on my shelf in its stand without a leather sheath, and I feel like a leather sheath is necessary for any knife package. It must be noted here that many of the techniques I'll be using today I learned from watching Paul Long's advanced sheath making videos, and I advise y'all to get those old DVDs and watch them because there is a ton of useful information in his videos. The first step of the process is design, and I will be drafting out my sheath template in Fusion 360, so let's fire up the computer and get started. First thing to do is to start a sketch. So I'll come up here to the top left, I select Create Sketch. You can really select any plane here. I'm going to do the front plane. And then we're going to insert our blades.dxf file, which is the profile of the Viking Seax that we made. We'll come in here to Insert, go to Insert DXF. Here you'll see Select the file. I'm going to click the File button, select from my computer. I will navigate to that file. You can select the location that you want it on your sketch, which really doesn't matter for our use. We'll hit OK. And there you go. Here's our DXF file of our Seax. Now to clean this up, the first thing I'm going to do is we only need one of these. I'm just going to go with the second one. I'm going to manipulate its orientation by mirroring it across this line here. I'm going to select, go to mirror. My mirror line is going to be the one that is true. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to delete the original. To rotate this guy, I'm going to select the entire profile, hit the M button just for move, and then you can see I got a little handle right here. I'm just going to drag this to 90 degrees, hit enter, and we have our guy rotated. So we want our sheath to come up to where the guard is on this knife, which is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just draw a large line across. When making a pouch sheath, I normally measure 3/32 of an inch from the edge to the welt. But in this case, I think I'm going to just go with the more or less exact distance, maybe 1/32 of an inch away, and I'll draw that in and see how it fits. So to get that 1/32 of clearance, I'm going to come out here and draw a line that is 0.03125 away. And I'm going to do this in a couple spots. I'm going to do this along the edge as well, probably right here. And then the idea here is to just draw a parallel line to the profile of the blade. So we'll come up here, we'll draw this all the way down. Now the edge always is a little harder because it curves. In this case though, it is still fairly straight. So I think I'm just going to drop a straight line coming up here. Let's see what that looks like. That's a straight line right there, and then we'll curve in with this line here. So we'll make a spline. Now what we'll do is we'll get rid of the extra lines by using the trim function. We'll hit trim and then select these corners. So that is the pocket. Next we'll do a 1/2 of an inch welt. So it's a very similar operation. We'll draw an inch out, 1/2 inch out, all the way around. Now we will delete these guidelines, and then we will trim. So that will be our welt. So the crazy thing about this style of sheath, which is just a blade sheath, is this is pretty much it when it comes to the profile. We'll cut off the extra lines we have at the top here. Now for ease of visualization, I'm going to go through this real quick and delete the original blade blank so that we are now just dealing with the sheath itself. Now that we have our profile, we need to separate out the components of our sheath. So to do that, we're going to copy and paste this guy over to the side. The first components we need is the welt by itself. That's super easy to do. We're just going to come in here to trim. We're going to trim away the mouth of the sheath, and we have the welt. Next up is to get the flat pieces of the sheath, the front and the back. This is actually the back of the sheath, if I'm correct. So we'll get the welt out of the way here. Let's get these welt lines out. And then we'll have to make a mirror of this for the front. So now we have the front and the back of the sheath. On the back of the sheath, we will need a liner. So we'll actually be cutting the leather down to half of its thickness and installing it as a liner across the back of the sheath. This is a nice premium upgrade that just makes a smooth part of leather touch your knife at all times. So I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste. We're going to come off to the side. Now, we'll cut the liner to fit during the gluing process. It's easier that way. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is make this actually just much bigger than it needs to be. I'm going to eyeball this. I'll probably just make a square essentially. And we're going to make it longer as well so that we can have something to hold on to while we skive it down to the appropriate thickness with our skiver. Something like that. And just to be fancy, we're going to be putting a chevron across the front here. So I'm going to take a copy of this guy. I'm going to bring it over to the side. And then we're going to kind of freehand in Fusion what that should look like. So as a recap, we have the front of our sheath, which we will not be doing an inlay on like we did on the low layer buoy. We have the back of our sheath. We have the two front and back liners. We have the welt. And then we have this decorative piece for the front. To get this out of Fusion 360, we hit Finish Sketch. We go down to our sketches here. We right click and say Save as DXF file. And then you can select where on your computer you'd like to save this file. I just want to note that the last time I cut leather on this machine, I saw just a little bit of a flame popping up, which is not enough for me to personally be concerned about safety or anything like that, especially with me standing right next to it. But the machine will shut off if it detects that flame, and we don't want to have any missed cuts. So go to your app, go to the device settings, and you can turn off the flame alarm essentially, which will allow you to have full cuts on this piece of leather. Obviously, do not walk out of your shop while it's cutting or anything like that. Be safe, don't be dumb. So here in the creative space, I'm going to drag the DXF file that we made in Fusion 360. You can see I have it defaulted to give me the total size. I'm going to change it from process on flat surface to use conveyor large. So this to show us the kind of area we have to deal with. You can see here we had a little mistake in Fusion 360. We left this tail here. I don't think that's going to be a big issue, but maybe I'll go back and take that off. So obviously we won't be able to cut out all of this at once. I'm going to do one piece at a time, probably, maybe two, but I'm going to start off with one. I'll start off with the welt. So I have to break this apart. So I'm going to click Ungroup. Now I can select these individually. That's right, and I can just delete them. Later we'll come back and put them back in as we need them. I have the welt here. I want to rotate this guy 90 degrees more or less, and then we'll walk it up here to our cut zone on the conveyor. So I have a table put on the conveyor right now, the cutting table. Y'all can check out my initial review to see how I made this cutting table from a larger one. I cut it down so that it would actually fit on the conveyor. I'm going to hit the camera icon here so that I can see exactly where that cutting table is, just to make sure that my leather is going to be in the right spot. I'm going to get a piece of leather blocked out and put on this plate, and then we'll cut out this welt. All right, now that I have the leather laid out on the machine, I'm going to hit the photo icon at the top right here. That will take a picture with the camera on the machine, just so I can see where the leather is. This looks decent. I think I'm going to move the entire thing to the right a little bit because you can see I have some area here in the uncuttable zone. So yeah, I'm just going to move the whole thing to the right a little bit. All right, that's probably good. I'm going to re-hit the icons at the top right here, take a new picture. Okay, I'm right on the edge. I'm going to go ahead and get this a little higher in the center here. Now this looks a little wasteful. I'm going to try to move it up a little bit so that I may be able to get two pieces out of this piece of leather here. Perfect. I also repositioned my blocks so that they won't be in the way. I'm going to just bring this up to about right there. which should give us plenty of extra room around the edges so we don't run off. Looking at my notes, I had written down that cutting leather worked pretty good with 85% power and 9 speed. So that's what we're going to do here. So I have my item selected. We're going to go to score because they don't have cut yet. We're going to go up to 85 on the power setting and 9 speed. We're going to do 1 pass. And honestly, that should be good. We have it in conveyor mode already. We have it laid out. Nothing's in the way here. Since this is not a gantry style laser, our hold down blocks are not in the way of the actual laser moving around. We have this lined up pretty much in the center of the machine, which I think will work better for a mirrored style laser. I think if you get closer to the top and bottom of the range, you're going to slightly get some angles there on your cuts. I don't know if it's really going to be enough to notice, but just for some of our first cuts, I'm going to make sure that it's in the center of the machine. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn on my fume extractor, hit start, and see how we cut. Still a couple little threads there. Trying to be gentle. Overall, that's a win. Now, I'm not sure if you can tell, but if you look at the angle of this cut, you can see that it does have some angle to it when cutting. The further you get out, the more this angle will likely be pronounced. For what we're doing here, it's not a huge issue because this is all going to be sanded anyway, but just know that you may get some angle here if you're not careful on very large workpieces. All right, so we are back on the computer. I'm going to go ahead and just delete that welt. We're going to redrag in our DXF file and then select what we want to mess with here. We're going to rotate this guy 90 degrees, take a new picture. All right. Bring this up to here. Cool thing is you can also hit the framing button here and it will give you an idea of where you're going to land. So to show you all what that looks like, I'm going to press framing. And you can see we get a line coming across here that shows you what the total width's going to be at that point. Our leather has a little bit of a bend in it, so you can see we're just getting up to the edge right there. That's real close. I'm going to go ahead and move everything up a little bit so that we don't go over the edge. Yeah, we definitely would go over the edge. All right, so that worked out pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and do that with each of these other pieces. Looks like I'll need some more leather, and I will cut that from my side in blocks and then just cut them out on the laser. While these pieces are being cut, I want to take a moment to once again thank xTool for sending me this laser for use in the Redbeard Ops shop. I'm really digging the ability to both cut leather and etch in my maker's mark with one unit, and I'm looking forward to using this machine for years to come. If you're interested in picking up one of xTool's lasers, I'll be posting affiliate links in the description below, along with links to other leather making tools I'll be using throughout the video. With the components cut out, it's time to start constructing the sheath. I'm going to be using this hand-operated leather splitter to thin down my liner pieces. You'll notice that I need some space on the end of the leather pieces in order to clamp on a handle. I found that I need about 3.5 to 4 inches of extra material for these clamps. Now that the skiving is complete, I can divert my attention to the front of the sheath. I'll be tooling it with a basket weave. I like to case my leather before tooling with a product called ProCarve, but water would also do the trick. Using a set of dividers, I mark out a 1/2 of an inch border around the sheath. Then with a ruler, I lightly mark a diagonal line across the sheath as a guide for my basket weave stamp. The maul I'm using is homemade, and the stamp is an X501 from Japan Select. These stamps are fantastic and worth the extra dollars in my opinion. Tooling leather is a meticulous job, and great care must be taken with each strike. As I approach borders, I cant the stamp to work the design up to the border carefully. It doesn't have to be perfect since we'll be using a camouflage stamp around the border, but you really don't want to go over the line, otherwise it will be obvious. I made this leather Maker's Mark stamp out of brass in my first xTool F1 Ultra review and will be using it on the back of the sheath today. With careful alignment in the arbor press, I stamp out my Maker's Mark on the case leather. My barge contact cement hardened up, so today I'll be using this Feebing's Leathercraft cement. I'm sure the hold strength isn't quite as good as the barge, but this stuff is much nicer to use, and the stitches should handle most of the shear forces on the sheath. I also glued on the decorative chevron on the front of the sheath. Not only does this look cool, but it also provides a clean spot to mount the front stud on the face of the sheath, offsetting it from the tooling. After the glue has had time to dry, I cut off the excess with my head knife. One small mistake on this sheath was that I didn't leave some extra material on the mouth of the back of the sheath. This will be more apparent once I install the liner on the front of the sheath, but I should have left about 1/8 of an inch across the top of the back of my design. Before moving on to the front liner, I'm going to be stitching on the decorative chevron. Note that the tip of this chevron is rounded, not pointed. I've found that a pointed tip has the potential to peel up over time. I used some pricking irons to space out my hole locations, and then a large needle in my mini mill to actually puncture the holes in the leather. We'll be using a locking saddle stitch on all components of this sheath, which utilizes one long piece of thread and 2 harness needles. This is how I affix the thread to the needles in such a way that they're not constantly coming out. Later in the video, while I'm stitching the main body, I'll give some good angles of the stitching process. This operation on the front liner is a little cumbersome, but I found that using pricking irons to go through both pieces here are the way to go. They allow you to pin down the liner to the front of the sheath while you get all the other holes punched through. With the holes in the front face of the sheath and the liner material, it's time to stitch them up before installing the stud. I eyeballed the stud's location, drilled a hole, and put a little bit of epoxy on the threads to lock in the backer to the stud. If anyone has good recommendations for suppliers of these studs, please let me know. I got these on Amazon, and while the quality looks decent, I think I'd rather have some with a wider screw head. Now we can hide that stud's backing screw with the liner. I apply some glue and then carefully fold over the liner as tightly as I can. At this point, it's time to put the 3 main pieces together. I start by gluing the welt onto the back panel, being careful to line up the laser cut edges as best that I can. Next, I'll glue the front panel on top of the welt. Then I left the assembly in between 2 large blocks of aluminum for a few hours to dry. Upon drying, I used a clean 120 grit belt on my 2x72 sander to level the pieces. In between sanding, I'll apply some quick slick liquid to the edges, which helps lay down the fibers when grinding. I feel this gives me a better base to start my finishing process from later on. It's also at this point that any of the char from burning through the leather with the laser is sanded off. The sanding process will turn up the corners to some degree, so this is a perfect time to use the beveler along the edges. I then set my stitch groover to around 1/4 of an inch and groove the front of the sheath. This groove will allow my stitches to sit down into the face of the sheath, as well as provide me with a target stitch line. The pricking irons I'm using here are just for marking my hole locations. Trying to go all the way through the leather pieces with these irons would really be a nightmare. I'll once again use a large needle in my mini mill to puncture the holes all the way through. After the holes are made, I used a stitch groover on the back to connect these holes so my stitches will lay flat. This is a pretty long stitch, so I'll be using a big piece of wax thread.
I like to cut out about 9 times the distance I'll be stitching. I'd rather have too much than to get close to the end and run out of thread. The saddle stitching process is as follows. I insert my right hand needle into the hole and then undercross it with my left hand needle before pulling through. Then I'll pull down on the thread that has gone through to the bottom of the hole so that my left hand needle doesn't catch this thread when inserting. Once the left hand needle is in, I'll wrap the thread in my right hand around the needle and pull it through all the way. Sometimes getting it through will require a pair of pliers. Now all that's left to do is pull both sides taut and start again. At the very end of my stitch line, I like to do some back stitching. I'll basically just stitch backwards one needle at a time, with both ending on the back of the sheath. All that's left to do on the stitching is to cut the thread and burn the ends lightly to melt them. On the edges, I'll be using some Quick Slick and 600 grit sandpaper to get them smooth. Then I burnished with some beeswax and a wood burnisher. On this sheath, I just coated it with some neat's foot oil and then heated it up for the oil to soak in. On some sheaths, I'll also put on a coat of bag coat, but on this one, I'll leave it to the final owner to decide. So this is how the sheath turned out. This one here is the second sheath that I've made of this style, and I'm becoming a big fan. While this sheath, paired with the Viking Seax that I've made it for, are likely more in the realm of art knives, it could be worn with a belt passing under the stud or in combination with a leather frog. Overall, I'm very happy with the final product. I'm not the best basket weaver, but I think this pattern came out fairly well. The stitching is good and the edges are smooth. I also like the depth of the maker's mark on the back of the sheath from our xTool etched brass stamp. While inserting the knife, the fit is very snug. I think in the future I'll provide a slight bit more clearance between the blade profile and the welt. I use 1/32 on this one, and in the future I think I'll use 2/32 of an inch. The biggest flaw of the build is the gap across the top of the back of the sheath. This is caused by the front liner adding some height to the front of the sheath. In the future on these types of sheaths, I'll add a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch at the top here to accommodate for the front liner. If y'all are interested in this knife, I'll be posting a build video in the cards above and in the description below. I also plan on selling this knife and sheath package on my website if anyone wants to own it. Whether you're a knife maker, sheath maker, or a laser enthusiast, I hope this video provided you with some value. If it did, please hit the like button below and consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, I'll catch y'all on the flip side.